So here you go. Okay, so the men in the audience, she's wearing clothes, don't look too hard. This advertisement is not for you. This advertisement is actually aimed at women. And the idea is, drink my bottled water, and you can look like me. Not me, but you can look like Jennifer Aniston. And she looks pretty good, it's true. And this is what advertising is about. And if you think about advertising, when you really watch an advertisement and stop thinking about what they're trying to sell you, think about how they're trying to sell it to you. Are they trying to sell it to you with fear, or with sex, or with style and all of the things that advertisers use? Think about that when you watch advertising. It's a great ad, though. Now, another issue is, and I get this all the time from the bottled water industry, who like to argue with me, isn't bottled water better than drinking soda? Wouldn't you rather drink bottled water than high fructose corn syrup or the sugary drinks that we're increasingly consuming in the United States? We have a problem with obesity. We have a problem with consuming too many calories. Our kids are drinking too much carbonated, sugary drinks. And if that's the question, it's a rhetorical one, because the answer is yes, bottled water is better than drinking soda. But that's not the only choice. And moreover, that's not what's actually happening in this country. So I was writing this book and I kept hearing this argument, we're not competing from the bottled water industry, we're not competing with tap water, we're competing with other beverages, other commercial beverages. And I thought to myself, all right, that's a great argument. Is it true? So I went and I looked up the numbers. I'm a scientist by training. I've worked for years on water issues. I like numbers. I think numbers are important. So I went and I looked up the numbers, and they're not easy to get, but it turns out they're available. So this is the most complicated graph I'm going to show you, but it's pretty simple if you think about it. There are two bar charts. The bar chart on the left is the total consumption of consumer products, beverage products, in 1980, and the one on the right is the same number for 2006. The bottom numbers on the blue are carbonated soft drinks, CSDs. The one in the middle is everything else, milk, beer, liquor, fruit juices, all the other commercial beverages that we buy. And the little top one, the little green ones, are bottled water. Okay, so what's happened? First of all, the one on the right is bigger than the one on the left. We're buying a lot more commercial products than we did in 1980. If you look at the bottom numbers, carbonated soft drinks, if you can't see them, we're buying a lot more carbonated soft drinks. It was 33 or 34 gallons per person per year. We're now drinking over 50 gallons per year carbonated soft drinks. Okay, we're buying more carbonated soft drinks. If you look at the top ones, the little green ones, the bottled water ones, we didn't drink much bottled water in 1980, about 3 gallons per person per year. We're now drinking almost 30, 28 gallons per person. It's actually around 30 now. 30 gallons per person per year. It's gone up by a factor of 10. We're drinking a lot more bottled water. And the middle one went from 107 to 101. We're actually drinking less of everything else. So what does this mean? The bottom line is we're drinking 36 gallons per person per year less tap water now than we drank in 1980. And we're drinking more carbonated soft drinks and more bottled water. So they're not competing against carbonated soft drinks. They're competing against tap water. They don't make money if they sell you tap water. They make money if they sell you carbonated soft drinks and bottled water. And is it any surprise that the biggest bottled water companies in the US are also selling carbonated soft drinks? They don't want to compete against themselves. They want to compete against a non-commercial product. So it's a great argument if it were true. And if you're in a store and you're dying of thirst and your only choice is bottled water or carbonated soft drinks, bottled water is better for you. But where's your refillable tap water? Okay. So let me conclude, because question and answers is always a lot more fun. Bottled water is not going to disappear, and I don't argue for bottled water being banned. I don't think that's a reality. I don't think it's necessary. If we're going to ban stuff, there's other things we ought to be banning first. I don't think bottled water is going to be going to disappear. Sometimes there are health reasons people ought to drink bottled water. But our production and consumption of bottled water has very serious environmental costs, economic costs, and social costs. And I think we ought to tackle the reasons people buy bottled water directly and tackle the problems associated with bottled water. So what should we do? We should support and expand state-of-the-art tap water systems. If our tap water systems aren't state-of-the-art, they ought to be. We have the technology to produce the highest quality tap water for very low cost. We ought to upgrade our tap water systems. We ought to improve the regulatory system for monitoring and enforcing tap water. If you don't like the taste of your water system, you ought to tell your water provider, because they can produce water that tastes like anything. They can produce the best quality, best tasting water around, and if they aren't, they ought to, and at a far lower cost than bottled water. Let's not give up on our tap water system. Let's develop, pass, and enforce smarter water regulations. And bottled water ought to be regulated to the same standard as tap water. And they ought to be regulated by the same agencies. I don't care who, FDA, EPA, you don't like EPA, somebody, but it ought to be a single agency, and there's no reason why the standards ought to be different. We ought to protect consumers from fraud and misrepresentations. There's some great stories in the book, which I will not share with you today, about bad advertising about bottled water, about really fraudulent stuff, and where's the Federal Trade Commission that's supposed to protect us from bad advertising? It's a hard job because the internet's made it really easy for all sorts of misrepresentations to spread. You crack down on a bad website in the United States and it moves to who knows where. But nevertheless, we need to figure out how to protect the public from bad advertising, not just for bottled water. We ought to require truthful labeling. It's easy enough to do, but we ought to know what we're getting on our products. And when we buy bottled water, we ought to reduce the consequences of bottled water. There are energy costs, there are problems associated with overpumping aquifers, there are problems associated with failing to recycle bottled water, and bottled water is plastic. So let's deal with the consequences of what's left when we've driven the sales of bottled water as low as they can go. There's good news. This is a graph that shows from 1976 to the year 2008, sales of bottled water in the United States. And it shows that incredible exponential explosion in the use of bottled water. It doubled again, it doubled again. It kept growing exponentially until 2008, when for the first time, sales of bottled water dropped a couple of percent from the previous year. And in 2009, the numbers aren't here, but in 2009, they dropped again a couple of percent. Bottled water industry says it's because of the terrible state of the economy, nobody's buying anything. I think that's a legitimate argument. But I also think there's a growing revolt against bottled water. We're learning more and more about it. We're learning about the consequences. We're learning that our tap water is pretty good. In fact, we're learning that it may be better than our bottled water sometimes. Restaurants are moving away from bottled water rather than aggressively pushing it. Municipalities are thinking, look, why should I be spending $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 a year on bottled water when the quality of our tap water is great and they're beginning to not spend money on bottled water? I think we're beginning to see a revolt against bottled water, and I talk about that in the book as well. As we move forward, I think this curve could continue to drop, and I think if we're smart, it will. Thank you very much. So I'd be happy to answer questions. People love to talk about water, and I left out all sorts of things in the book.
Hi, thank you so much for coming.
Sure.
My first question is that I'd like to know how these hideous companies actually acquire the water. Are they paying us for the water? That's
a great question. I described two kinds of water, spring water, and reprocessed municipal water, basically. The companies that use reprocessed water, Coke and Pepsi in particular, they bottle it at all of their bottling plants all over the country. It's made to a standard so that bottled water, Dasani or Aquafina here in Seattle or in San Francisco or in Detroit, all tastes the same. They typically pay what you and I pay, municipal water rates. They pay very little. Sometimes they pay less because they might pay commercial rates for their water. The bottlers that bottle spring water is a whole nother question. They sometimes get permits to bottle huge quantities of water at almost no cost, really incredibly low cost. They get permits from local townships or local counties or from the state sometimes. They pay pennies for thousands, often pennies for thousands of gallons of water. There's some numbers in my book, I don't have them in my head, but they pay very little for the water they typically extract from groundwater.
So what I'm hearing is that these companies are essentially stealing public water. That's number one. I want to make that point. Thank you for that answer. My second, I have a comment. Many, many years ago, I noticed that on the Seinfeld show, when his friends would come in and they would want water, they would go into the refrigerator and get a bottle of water. And I told my children that this was a conspiracy to get us all to drink, to do that because, so that's just my own theory. My second comment is, you're encouraging us to support and expand state-of-the-art public water, but wouldn't these hideous corporations do exactly what they do in other areas in terms of they would fight anyone who had a serious movement to cut their profits? Your comments?
Sure. First of all, a comment about Seinfeld. There's no doubt that